Thank you for that introduction, George. Again, my name is Travis Corson. I'm the Communications Director for Special Projects at Frontiers of Freedom. And what I'm going to speak to you about today are catch shares, which are a free market, limited government solution to fisheries management. So just a little bit of background about the fishing industry. It's a large part of the global food supply chain and the economy. In 2007, proteins from fish accounted for 15.7% of the total global animal protein supply. In 2008, it was estimated that 44.9 million people globally are directly engaged in the fishing industry. In the United States, fishing regulations started in 1976 with the passage of the Magnuson-Stevens Act, which regulates coastal fishing, but it's been a command and control affair where targets are put in place by the NOAA. The act was reauthorized in 1996 and 2006 and is currently up for reauthorization in Congress again this year. So just a little bit about why the current system isn't cutting it. Outdated central planning has led to hazardous fishing conditions, depletion of many fish stocks, and economic inefficiency. Fishing is one of the most dangerous occupations in the United States. During 2000 to 2010, an annual average of 46 deaths occurred, 124 per 100,000 workers in the fishing industry, compared with an average of 4 per 100,000, or 5,466 among all U.S. workers. If you do the math, that means that fishing is 31 times more dangerous than the national average. Why is that the case? Because there are currently, many fisheries, only a set amount of days that you can go out. So I'm not sure if some of you have seen Deadliest Catch before, but if you look at the first season versus subsequent seasons, it gets a little less dangerous after the first year because they went from a fishing day system to one where they actually instituted catch shares in those crab fisheries. So it results in more dangerous conditions when you're under the current system, and also things like family occasions and other things will have to be skipped by these fishermen to go out for those fishing days. Depletion of fish stocks. More than 75% of the world's fish stocks are underperforming at an estimated annual loss of $50 billion. Fishing yields have remained stagnant over the past decade, even as the number of fishing vessels has increased. And billions of dollars globally of subsidies are bestowed on the fishing industry, making overfishing profitable, even as per capita fishing yields decline. It encourages a lot of boats and a lot of fishermen who otherwise would be out of the market to stay in due to this economic disincentive. And speaking of that economic inefficiency, global subsidies total $30 to $34 billion annually. In the U.S. alone, we spend $70 million every year bailing out failed federally managed fisheries. One of the more perverse subsidies, the fuel subsidy, actually facilitates deep sea fishing, which is very fuel intensive, but also makes fishing more difficult to manage because the migratory species go out to these international waters, and that's where the deep sea vessels catch. Other regulatory controls, such as the length of season, as I was speaking about, fishing areas, boat size, engine size, limit the number of fishers, but they don't control the intensity of the fishing efforts. Basically today, these requirements put the nanny state and the government right on your boat. These days have also resulted in a fishing stock that is not stable year-round. So you get a glut at the beginning. When the fish come in, the fish are frozen, the fishermen get a lower price, and then throughout the year, small businesses actually hurt to find some of these fishing stocks. If this failed central planning scheme is allowed to continue, it'll eventually raise food prices, put fishermen out of work, and possibly lead to the extinction of various sea species. So, an absence of property rights, combined with subsidies, has created this perverse incentive to deplete the fisheries. The U.S. should push for the World Trade Organization harder to ban such subsidies, and ending these subsidies should reduce the excess fishing capacity that has led to overfishing. However, if the demand is high enough and inelastic enough, problems caused by overfishing may persist, since the WTO enforcement process is very difficult and time-consuming. Therefore, we should introduce a complementary reform, property rights, into this fishing management system. What are catch shares? Catch shares are a conservative approach to fisheries management. They utilize market forces to allocate resources, encouraging conservation via private responsibility. They operate under federalism and localism as its governing principles. They embrace resource usage rather than locked-out preservation, and they save federal monies because they are not top-down, command-and-control environmental regulation that requires subsidies from the government for these failed fisheries. Catch shares were instituted under the Bush administration starting in 2006 and currently govern 65% of America's fisheries. According to Science magazine, if catch shares had been instituted globally from the 70s, when fishing management really started becoming on the agenda, the incidence of fishery collapse would have been reduced by 2/3. Under a catch share system, the government sets the total allowable catch for a given season and then allocates shares of the catch, or quotas, to individual boats, firms, and other stakeholders in the form of a transferable right. By allocating portions of these fish, catch shares eliminate the race to fish or the tragedy of the commons that has governed these fisheries and results in less wasteful fishing techniques. In New Zealand, where the program was pioneered, the results have been impressive. Fish exports have almost doubled from $469 million in 1986, when the program began, to $923 million today. In short, taxpayers save and fishermen profit when we institute a catch share system. There are a few detractors to catch shares, and there are a number of arguments that people have used, and I'd like to walk you through those very quickly about why they're not the case. One of the biggest ones that comes to mind is the market correction issue, saying that fishermen and other stakeholders hurt under this system. Catch shares does not actually result in a market consolidation, but rather a market correction. Efficient fishing vessels will have an incentive to buy quotas from those with older, less efficient vessels, and boats that otherwise would not be fishing because of the subsidies that are keeping them in business will leave the fleet altogether. As I was speaking earlier, the implementation of catch shares in Alaska resulted in a reduction of 250 boats from 2004 to 89 generally larger boats in the 2005 season, resulting in a more efficient system of catching fish. Evidence has suggested that it was this large fishing fleet itself actually that was ruining the industry. In the long run, catch shares are also better for the fishermen themselves. Traditional fisheries management threatens to put all fishermen out of work if species go extinct, which is the current path we're going on. The first year is always the worst year for the program, but the long-term benefit, especially in places like the Gulf and Alaska, have been impressive. Where catch shares have been implemented, you've seen an increase in profitability and wages. In 2011, New England fleet-wide profits were up 10% over that same time in March 2010. Wages increased more than 100% for cruise fishing under the Alaska crab catch share system. And in the Gulf of Mexico, since the implementation of the red snapper catch share program in 2007, the value of the fishery, based on quota prices, has increased by 82%, and the inflation-adjusted ex-vessel price of red snapper has increased by 17%. There's also an argument that some environmental groups will use this as a way to block barriers, block fishermen from fishing, and that the barriers to entry will make it difficult for new fishermen and small fishermen to enter this market. As far as the new fishermen are concerned, currently to fish in a profitable way with such short catch seasons, you need a large boat, you need a lot of different heavy equipment, and you need a variety of other things that require a significant upfront capital investment in order to do that. Under catch shares, a fisherman with just a small boat can buy a small share, go out and line and hook fish, and it actually is much cheaper and much less capital intensive to get into the program. People say that the market itself isn't active, but in New Zealand, the market is very active. There are more than 120,000 leases and 30,000 sales of quotas at the end of the 1998 fishing year, with an annual average of 8,700 leases and 2,000 sales of quotas. Now, the NOAA does need to be kept in check, and there have been places where they've set these limits too low. A report from Dartmouth College showed that there could have been an additional 32 million pounds of groundfish that could have been brought in from a northeast Atlantic fishery without endangering the sustainability of the fish stock. So there is some NOAA oversight that needs to be taken into account. But comparative analysis of oyster bed management in the Chesapeake Bay and the Gulf of Mexico illustrate the point, as privately managed oyster beds are healthier and more productive than those under state protection. The NOAA also needs to rebalance away from some economic, environmental interests that have governed them. The science for some of these catch share programs is underfunded because instead of funding those properly, they've been putting money towards climate change science, towards satellite, towards things like that. So some congressional oversight in the process will be necessary in order to make sure that the NOAA is implementing these effectively. One of the most common ones, catch shares is not cap and trade. Fishing limits are already set via fishing days, and there's also a natural limit on how fish can be caught. If there were no restrictions with modern technology, we would replete the world's fish in a few years. Seafood also has a demand absent government. Carbon credits do not. Before there were catch shares, before there was a United States government, there was a fishing market. Last point, recreational fishing. Some people think that will block them out. It's actually cordoned off from catch shares, and this only exclusively governs commercial fishing. So with that, I just wanted to introduce you to catch shares a little bit. It's a conservative, free market approach to fisheries management, and one that takes the power from bureaucrats in Washington and puts it back in the hands of fishermen.